highlighted this afternoon that after much walking through the darkness, the UK government has actually finally come to a point where it's now getting on with the outcomes of the referendum on June the 23rd. But however, that referendum, as we all know, only said one thing, that we had to leave the EU institutions. It did not determine the terms in which we leave, and it did not discuss the new relationships with the other 27 member states. This is the important now to get our objectives on the agenda as the process about that begins. Now, I'm disappointed that prior to this point in the invocation of Article 50, that the Westminster Government's handling of this matter has not shown sufficient respect to the institutions of the devolved nations in moving forward, even though the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government both submitted their own proposals for consideration. And it's now critical that the UK Government delivers on its stated commitment to fully involve the devolved nations. In my opinion, it needs to go beyond merely meeting with ministers through the JMC or the JMCEN, but actually take on board what each government has put forward and involve ministers from devolved nations in the negotiating process where appropriate, and create a new constitutional mechanism for our nations. And this was highlighted in the report by the Exiting the EU Select Committee, published only today. And for those who want to read it, paragraph 10 or paragraph 13, have a good look at it. But also a report from the Lords Constitutional Committee, published in March, which states, and I quote, that this will mean the UK Government and the devolved administrations will need to manage new interfaces and potentially overlapping responsibilities between reserved matters and devolved competences in areas where the writ of the EU law no longer runs. The UK Government and devolved administrations will need to agree before Brexit how those new interfaces will be managed. In other words, everyone is saying, except the UK Government, we need a constitutional structure which is based upon statute, not simply upon a good handshake. Now, there are some in the UK Government that actually accept devolution. Some even get it. But too many don't, and have a belief of everything must be driven by Westminster and Whitehall. We must do all we can to actually collaborate strongly with our colleagues in other devolved nations to ensure the UK Government delivers on its words and sentiment in both Article 50 letter and the Repeal Bill white paper. They say it, let's make sure they deliver on it. Now to play with, the Welsh Government's white paper also placed the economy at the top of the agenda, and understandably so, because we need prosperity across this nation, and the ability of Welsh businesses to trade without barriers, whether financial or regulatory, is critical to allow it to grow. And manufacturing plays a great part in the Welsh economy, more than any other nation in the UK, actually 16% of GVA. And so we must ensure that a difficult divorce with the WTO Brexit rules does not happen, because it would mean crippling tariffs placed upon our exports. Now, I noticed the UKIP amendment, actually 6, highlights that they want to say that it's £8 billion, we can use the money. I just think that's an excuse to actually justify why they can't deliver on their promises of £350 million a week going into our public services. They want to hide from the fact they can't do it. And therefore they're now saying, oh, let's give the EU another £8 billion or so. So that's something we need to address very clearly. The White Paper's priority, actually, is for unfettered access, and one which we should all embrace. We know that we understand that free trade agreements are important, but we also must understand the EU27 position as well, because very often we talk about our position, but there's negotiations. And it was Mark Rector's talking about the mastery of the letter on Article 50. I saw a veiled threat in that letter about security. I don't call that mastery. I call that threats and intimidation, and that's not good negotiation.
I mean, can I just say, almost all my speech was dedicated to the draft negotiating mandate and identifying about 3 or 4 things I thought was really positive and actually could allow a good negotiation in our mutual interest in showing respect to the EU position.
I take that point, but when I asked to intervene on the point he raised at the very beginning, he didn't allow me to happen. So I took the chance now to tell him what I think about it, quite clearly. Now, we understand there are risks. There are risks because of we leave in. We must address those risks in the coming negotiations, and I believe strongly that direct involvement of Welsh National Government ministers in those negotiations will be important. We have to move forward. I'm conscious of time, so on the amendment, I wish you'd actually said we would actually prepare a bill, not lay a bill, because I think the preparation of one is at this point important. It's semantics, but it's important semantics. And therefore, the laying of a bill, perhaps at this stage, is presumptuous that we don't, because we haven't seen the bill yet. We haven't seen the bill. We need to see that. But I won't deny preparation is important in that situation. Now, the UK government has a mandate for us to leave the EU, but no mandate to use the Brexit as an excuse for a change in ideological approaches in the way in which we look at our economy and our public services. As they negotiate our exit and our future relationship, they must accept constitutional structure changes, and they must ensure that the interests and priorities of the devolved nations are actually not to be ignored.
Bennett.